We're looking at the potential ancestral link between three incredibly potent substances. Silphium, the celebrated but now lost Libyan panacea. Ephedra, which is widely associated with the Indo-European soma or homa, and a more secretive Dacian root called Polovraga.
And this all falls under what some people call the Grand Unified Theory, or GUT, which posits that these three powerful drugs, which seem to operate on completely opposite ends of the human nervous system, might actually share a single botanical ancestor, an ancestor rooted deep in, Proto-Indo-European tradition.
Exactly. And that's the core intellectual challenge for us today. The central question is this: does the overwhelming evidence from the plant's morphology, its physical structure, and the persistent cultural lore of a unifying cult of the rod, does that prove a common genetic ancestor for these plants, even when modern molecular data seems to conflict with it? I'll be arguing for the validity of this Ferula continuum, asserting that a single, shape-shifting biological ancestor adapted across climates.
And I will be challenging that rather ambitious genealogical claim. While the mythological parallels are, I admit, very striking, I think we have to prioritize the hard evidence of current molecular phylogenetics. I'll contend that the similarity is a classic case of convergent ritual use of plants that simply look alike, and that the distinct chemistry of these substances just can't support the theory of a single unifying genetic ancestor.
I think we have to move past a simple, I'd say overly rigid reading of modern DNA analysis, which only tells us where the plants are now. We need to try and embrace a more archaic view of nature. The true link for me lies in the structural signature of the rod. We're dealing with the concept of the primal narthex, which literally means the hollow pithy stalk, and this defines the entire Ferula genus. This is the structure that the myth of Prometheus tells us was used to steal fire from the gods. It's the constant across Eurasia, a universal container of power. My position is that this single ancestor, dispersed from its original homeland, and I think that's likely the post-glacial Danube Basin, and then through immense environmental pressure, demonstrated a radical phenotypic plasticity. This is, it's the capacity of a single genotype to produce multiple, very different physical forms depending on the environment it finds itself in.
And just consider the environmental poles. In the cold continental Carpathians of Dacia, what the ancients might have called Hyperborea, the plant faced short growing seasons, harsh winters. So to survive, it stored its energy, its power, in a massive, deep root. This is what produced the northern panacea, Polovraga. This root-based storage is a clear adaptation to intense cold stratification.
And in the arid Libyan heat of Cyrene?
Well, there the climate was fundamentally different. You have high water stress, intense UV radiation. The plant defensively exuded a protective, highly specialized metabolic resin laser, or sulphinum. This resin was the southern relaxant, a powerful abortifacient. The lore itself confirms this vast reach. Apollo, the god of medicine and colonization, he acts as this sort of pharmacological commuter, traveling between the stimulant pole in the north, in Dacia, and the relaxant pole in Cyrene. This wasn't just a coincidence, it was a powerful religious and pharmacological axis, defined by one plant's ability to shapeshift.
I do acknowledge the power of the cult of the rod as a unifying mythos. The structural similarity of these giant umbellifers is certainly evocative. However, the functional and the genetic evidence for me strongly indicates divergence, not adaptation from a single source. I don't see how one plant could be genetically unified when its end products are so radically different. Modern molecular phylogenetics, which, studies the evolutionary relationships among organisms, presents a massive hurdle for this unified theory. Studies focusing on the Ferula genus show that Ferula drudeana, which is the leading candidate for Silphium found in Turkey, it descended from distinct Central Asian Ferula populations, and crucially, the North African Ferula populations form a distinct monophyletic group. For our listeners, that means they share a common ancestor among themselves that is separate from the one shared by the Central Asian group.
This strongly supports separate, not a recent shared descent across the continent. And furthermore, the chemistry seems incompatible. Silphium resin, the relaxant, was rich in estrogenic compounds. It acted as a contraceptive and aid for digestion. Soma, or hama,
often linked to the Ephedra genus, is defined by powerful alkaloids, primarily stimulants like ephedrine, used for focus, endurance, what some have called the vegetable war. For a single ancestor plant to yield such functionally and chemically opposed results across a relatively minor geographical distance, it's about 1,500 kilometers between Cyrenaica and Dacia, that requires an evolutionary leap that, to me, defies biological probability. The plasticity would have to be not just morphological, but chemically revolutionary.
I think we're interpreting that evolutionary data too rigidly. You're relying on what is essentially a static genetic map. The molecular evidence, it merely confirms the existence of strong geographical isolation and the subsequent specialization. It tells us what is happening now, after millions of years of separation, but it doesn't preclude a deep, shared ancestry in the Danube Basin, which was the center of the Proto-Indo-European expansion. Let's elaborate on the plasticity. We're not talking about one species producing both at once. We're talking about environmental stress triggering a differential expression of existing genetic potential. When the plant is subjected to high UV exposure and water scarcity, like in Libya, it's a survival mechanism to shunt energy into synthesizing protective resinous metabolites, the complex oils and gums that form the lazerite to seal moisture and protect against pathogens.
But the root,
In the cold north, the short growing season and reliable ground moisture favor an entirely different strategy: maximum energy investment into a massive, starchy root for overwintering. These roots contain different metabolic compounds optimized for storage, not defense. This root-focused lineage is still observable in the north. Species like Ferula hafeli and Angelica possess the immense roots that Theophrastus described for Silphium. These northern cousins are the living, morphological, and I'd say functional evidence of that original Polovraga medicinal power remained in the root, not the resin.
I'm just not convinced by the idea that an environment can flip a plant from synthesizing relaxing estrogenic compounds to powerful stimulating alkaloids like ephedrine. I mean, while plasticity is real, the chemical gulf is simply too wide. You're asking us to prioritize a theoretical ancestral model over quantifiable genetic distance and chemical function. When phylogenetic analysis repeatedly shows that North African Ferula are a distinct monophyletic group, separated from the Central Asian lineage by millions of years, the most parsimonious explanation is parallel evolution. Similar structural pressures, the need for a tall, hollow stalk, led to similar structures being adopted in similar ritual contexts.
That is a fair scientific challenge. But if we accept that the current genetic map is necessarily incomplete, especially for an extinct or near-extinct ancestor, where does that leave us? For me, it forces us to look past the physical molecules and back into the cultural memory, the lore, to understand how this knowledge was preserved. We're missing a key piece of information, and I believe it's located right there in the Dacian narrative.
you're referring to the journey of the high priest Decineus.
Precisely. The journey of the Dacian high priest Decius, who traveled to Egypt, assimilated knowledge, and then returned home to ban the consumption of wine. That's more than just a historical anecdote. It represents a successful, deliberate effort to preserve the pure, ancestral sacrament, the Polovraga, from contamination by foreign intoxicants. He was, in effect, smuggling the secret seed of the precise knowledge of its preparation back to the sacred mountain of Cogayonon. It suggests the Dacians saw themselves as the guardians of the original template. And this connection isn't abstract. This tradition survived in the Solomonari, the legendary weather wizards of the Carpathians. They carried the golden wand, the ceremonial narthex, directly linking the Dacian aristocracy to the ancient cult of the rod. This is why we find associations with figures like Vlad the Impaler's family, who may well have been guarding the ancestral seed or its location near the Gate of the Immortals at Polovraga Cave.
So why is the staff so important if it's just a plant?
Herodotus records that the Hyperboreans wrapped in wheat straw to Delos. They were literally hiding the potent plant or its seeds, the wild signal, inside domestic noise, a mundane wrapping, to ensure it bypassed the uninitiated, the profane, and remained sacred. The Dacian lore and the preservation of the rod as a magical artifact, they both confirm that knowledge of the plant's dual nature was crucial and heavily guarded.
Well, I find the steganography theory fascinating. I really do. But I would argue that you're mistaking the functional utility of the rod for a genetic lineage. The very structure of the Ferula genus, the hollow, thick-walled pith, naturally makes it the perfect technological tool, regardless of its DNA. I mean, think about its physical properties. The hollow core means the pith, the narthex, burns slowly, allowing it to contain an ember for long distances. That's why it's associated with Prometheus and fire carrying. Its height and rigid structure make it an ideal staff, a measurement tool, or symbolically, a lightning rod. The Solomonari's golden wand, which allows them to supposedly control weather and clouds, it derives its power because the structure dictates the function. It's the perfect container or symbol for channeling power. It explains the weather magic and the staff's prevalence without requiring a shared genetic descent across continents. The power is structural and technological, not necessarily genealogical.
That's a compelling argument, but I find it hard to believe that the pharmacological link is purely coincidental. Which brings us to the tragedy of its loss. The ultimate tragedy of Silphium's extinction was not purely botanical. It was a cultural and economic catastrophe, the economic trap. Rome's sheer, rapacious greed and the systematic commodification of a plant that was deeply sacred. It broke the complex symbiotic mycorrhizal web that the plant depended upon. As Theophrastus noted, Silphium would not bear cultivation. It needed a hidden, complex partnership with underground fungi to thrive. When Rome attempted to mass harvest it for profit and tax revenue, they inadvertently destroyed the entire ecological system necessary for its survival and germination. They broke the code, and we lost the relaxant pole of the ancient world.
The ecological argument about symbiotic failure is strong, but the economic explanation may not be the whole story.
But consider the chilling modern parallel, the legacy of this loss. We lost the Cyrenian love, the powerful estrogenic relaxant. What survived and thrived? The northern stimulant template. It was a Romanian chemist, Lazăr Edeleanu, who in 1887 first synthesized amphetamine using the exact chemical template of the Ephedra alkaloids, the northern rod. This demonstrates a deep, continuous line of pharmacological potential stemming directly from the north. We are now a civilization running almost entirely on Hyperborean speed, driven by the pure stimulant. The Polovraga, the hidden root in the Carpathians, remains the missing, balancing piece of the pharmacological puzzle. This imbalance, the loss of the original relaxant, is something we continue to suffer on a global societal scale.
I agree that but I must return to the physical reality of the extinction. While commodification was undoubtedly destructive, the primary cause of Silphium's demise is best attributed to ecological factors that transcends spiritual failure. Studies indicate that deforestation, overgrazing, and the resulting soil erosion, early anthropogenic environmental change, eliminated the crucial cold stratification conditions needed for the seeds to germinate. Cold stratification is simply the mandatory period of prolonged cold that certain seeds, especially in arid climates, must undergo before they can break dormancy and sprout. The shifting soils and climate simply eliminated this narrow window of required conditions. This framing positions Silphium's disappearance as a straightforward ecological failure caused by human modification of the environment, not necessarily the spiritual breakdown of a mycorrhizal web.
Ultimately, we started with a question of genealogy. I maintain that the pervasive structural evidence points toward a structural genealogy. The power of the Ferula genus to provide both fire and medicine, whether as the massive Polovraga root in the north or the complex Silphium resin in the south, suggests a single shape-shifting ancestor. The memory of this unique genetic potential was carried and, I believe, successfully hidden by cultural figures like Decineus and the Solomonari, who guarded the original template of the rod. We have to recognize the Dacian lore as the crucial link we were missing.
And I maintain that scientific caution is the necessary lens here, while the morphological connection, the intellectual framework of the rod, is a potent link that binds the Dacian, Indo-Iranian, and Cyrenian traditions. The persistent lack of molecular evidence combined with the distinct and chemically opposed functional profiles suggests that this convergence is cultural and functional. These plants were used similarly because the structure was available and functional as a staff, a fire carrier, a container for ritual drugs, but not because they shared a recent unifying genetic parent.
Regardless of its precise genetic origin, the loss of Silphium represents a severe, ancient imbalance in human pharmacological knowledge.
It remains a fascinating mystery that demands we continue to seek biological remnants and rigorously interpret our oldest stories through both a sophisticated mythological and a modern molecular lens.